1 single dollar. That's what Shelby County, Tennessee will sell you land for. Not a typo, not a scam. Actual deeded property in the Memphis metro area for less than a gas station coffee. And if you think that sounds too good to be true, you're half right, because there's a catch, and it's a fascinating one. Tennessee isn't handing out cheap parcels to be nice. The state has created an entire ecosystem of regulatory loopholes, tax incentives, and flat-out exemptions that make off-grid living genuinely affordable. We're talking about towns where you can build a house without a single permit, communities where your monthly expenses drop to $100 because you're sharing infrastructure with neighbors, and state programs that'll cut $70,000 off the cost of your home. These are real mechanisms: land banks, conservation easements, intentional communities with 40-year track records, and entire counties that opted out of building codes decades ago. Here are 10 dirt-cheap Tennessee places offering free land or cash for off-grid living. Hoenwald. Hoenwald sits in Lewis County, and anything outside the city limits operates under a brilliantly simple rule. The county government does not have a building and codes department. They don't employ inspectors. They don't issue permits. You want to build a straw bale house? Go ahead. Earth shelter dwelling. Nobody's stopping you. In dollar terms, getting a house permitted and inspected normally costs $15,000 to $40,000 before materials, plan review fees, multiple inspection visits, requirements for specific materials that meet code. All of that evaporates in unincorporated Lewis County. State law makes you install a septic system and meet electrical standards. Everything else is on you. The trade-off: you're holding all the liability. Your roof collapses, that's your problem. Homemade solar setup catches fire, and this happens with owner-installed battery banks. You're dealing with burning lithium and no professional oversight, but the math is unbeatable. Rural land runs $5,000 to $15,000. Septic costs $3,000 to $8,000. Build a cabin for $15,000 to $40,000. Add solar for $8,000 to $20,000. Total $30,000 to $83,000 for a finished homestead. Compare that to $250,000 minimum for a code-compliant rural home elsewhere. Healthcare reality: Wayne Medical Center in Waynesboro is 19 miles away with a 74% recommendation rate. Maury Regional Medical Center in Columbia, 28 miles out, has awards for orthopedic care. That's 20 to 30 minutes minimum every time. Memphis. Memphis runs a land bank under Shelby County that sells tax-delinquent properties at rock-bottom prices. Sometimes $1, sometimes a few hundred. You search the eProperty Plus portal, submit an offer, and if you're current on property taxes, you're eligible. The county runs a 10-day public notice for competing bids. If nobody outbids you, county commission votes, and you get a quitclaim deed. Quitclaim means the title transfers exactly as is, zero warranties. Environmental lien from illegal dumping 20 years ago? It's yours. Tax lien you didn't catch? Yours. The county guarantees nothing, but if the parcel checks out, you've got an urban lot for pocket change. Shelby County allows tiny houses on permanent foundations as primary residences under IRC Appendix Q standards. 400 square feet or less, 6 feet 8 inches minimum ceiling height in living areas, 6 feet 4 inches in bathrooms and kitchens, proper emergency egress. Buy the lot for $1, spend $50,000 to $80,000 on an Appendix Q compliant tiny home with permanent foundation. Add $2,000 to $5,000 for city water and sewer hookup. Total $52,000 to $86,000. Traditional Memphis starter homes run $150,000 and up. You've cut entry cost in half with a legally recognized mortgage-eligible structure. The catch is competition. 10-day bidding period means you're not alone. The land bank prioritizes people who can prove they'll start construction quickly, so you need a plan, not just a checkbook. Summertown. Summertown is home to The Farm, an intentional community that's been running since 1971. 1,750 acres held in trust, 100 residences, 20 miles of internal roads, a community water system, a school, infrastructure that would cost an individual off-gridder $200,000 or more to replicate. Residents pay $114 a month in dues to maintain all of it. $114 covers road maintenance, water system upkeep, administrative costs for a self-governing community of several hundred people. Typical Nashville suburbs charge homeowners association fees of $200 to $400 a month without energy independence or food sovereignty. At the farm, you're living off-grid or on renewable energy, growing a chunk of your own food, participating in a cooperative economy that's functioned for over 50 years. But the land is held in trust. You never own the dirt. You own equity in any buildings you construct or improve, but the acreage stays communal. If you leave, you sell your building equity to the next resident, not the land. For some people, that's a deal breaker. For others, it's the entire point, opting out of the speculative real estate market in exchange for permanent, stable access to a low-cost lifestyle. The vetting process is intense. You start as a visitor, paying $3 a night. If you like it and they like you, you become a resident, which requires living there for at least a year and paying monthly dues. After a year, you can apply for provisional membership, another $150 processing fee. After your second year, the full membership votes on whether to let you in. If they say yes, you pay a one-time $3,000 membership fee, and you're a permanent resident with full voting rights. 2 years minimum before you're fully integrated. You're being evaluated for cultural fit, work ethic, commitment to consensus governance. The community runs on agreement, not top-down rules. Meetings and collective decision-making are non-negotiable parts of life here. If that sounds exhausting, this isn't your scene. But if you pass the filter, you're looking at a cost of living that's 60 to 70% below comparable housing in Middle Tennessee. The farm sits near Summertown, close enough to Hoenwald that you're in the same healthcare corridor. Wayne Medical and Maury Regional are both under 30 miles. You've got the autonomy of off-grid living with the safety net of a community that's been solving these problems since the 70s. People here have been refining solar installations, food production systems, and cooperative governance longer than most off-grid YouTube channels have existed. The other advantage is knowledge transfer. When you move to an isolated rural property, you're figuring everything out alone. At the farm, you're surrounded by people who've already made every mistake you're about to make. They know which solar installers are reliable, which septic contractors won't rip you off, where to source building materials at cost. That institutional knowledge is worth more than the $114 a month you're paying in dues. And here's something people miss. Because the land is held in trust, property taxes stay manageable. The county can't reassess the land based on speculative development value because development isn't legally possible under the trust structure. Your tax burden is based on agricultural use, which keeps it low. Combine that with the shared infrastructure costs, and you're operating at a fraction of what an equivalent lifestyle would cost if you tried to do it solo on private land. The farm isn't just a community, it's a financial mechanism for making off-grid living sustainable long-term. Lawrenceburg. Lawrenceburg sits in one of Tennessee's development gap zones, which makes it a prime target for THDA subsidies. The Tennessee Housing Development Agency runs a program that gives nonprofit developers up to $70,000 per house to build in areas where construction costs exceed appraised value. For you, the buyer, this means you're getting a home that cost $100,000 to build, but you're buying it for $60 or $70 because the state subsidized the developer. THDA also offers seller credits of 3 to 6% of the purchase price, which reduces what you owe at closing. Then there's down payment assistance, $6,000 in the deferred option, or up to 6% of the sales price in the amortizing option. These programs stack, which creates some genuinely surprising math. Let's run the numbers on a Lawrenceburg scenario. Say you're buying a THDA subsidized home in Lawrence County for $70,000. The state kicks in a 5% seller credit, knocking off $3,500. You use the $6,000 down payment grant. You're walking into this house with $500 out of pocket, and the mortgage is on $64,000. That's less than most people spend on a new truck, and you're getting a finished, code-compliant, inspected home on a lot that's probably large enough for gardens, solar arrays, maybe even small livestock. The eligibility requirements are real. You need a credit score of 640 or higher for the down payment grants. You have to take a homebuyer education course, which usually runs 4 to 8 hours and covers budgeting, credit management, and the mechanics of mortgages. There are income caps, and they vary by county. THDA prioritizes low to moderate income buyers, not high earners looking for vacation properties. And you have to work with an approved nonprofit developer, which means you're not picking the land yourself. The developer has already chosen the site, usually in a rural or economically distressed area where the gap exists. But if your goal is to get into an off-grid capable home without the risk of DIY construction, this is the cleanest path. The homes are code compliant, inspected, and mortgage eligible. You're not assuming liability for experimental building techniques or non-professional electrical work. And because they're in hard to develop areas, you're often looking at larger lots with space for the kind of systems you'd want if you're pursuing any level of self-sufficiency. Lawrenceburg also has Southern Tennessee Regional Health System, which got a 74% patient recommendation rating. You're not isolated from healthcare the way you would be in some of the more remote off-grid zones. The town has grocery stores, hardware stores, basic retail infrastructure. It's not Nashville, but it's also not a place where the nearest Walmart is your only option for supplies. The second order insight here is that THDA's development gap subsidies are effectively a wealth transfer from the state budget to individuals willing to live in economically distressed areas. The state has decided it's worth $70,000 per house to stabilize these communities and prevent further depopulation. If you're a remote worker or retiree with flexibility about where you live, you're the beneficiary of that policy. You're getting a home at a price point that wouldn't exist in a free market, funded by taxpayers across the state in exchange for choosing to live somewhere that the market has otherwise written off. Knoxville. Knoxville's Homemakers program identifies vacant lots and deteriorating structures, then sells them to people who commit to neighborhood improvement. The city sets a target price for each parcel, but if you come in under that price with a solid plan, like building affordable housing for low-income residents or creating a community garden, they'll consider it. This is urban infill, not rural isolation. You're buying land that's already cleared, already connected to city utilities, already zoned residential. The city's done the heavy lifting. Your job is to build something that improves the neighborhood rather than degrading it. The program explicitly allows tiny homes under IRC Appendix Q, which means you can put up a 400 square foot house on a permanent foundation and live there legally as your primary residence. Knoxville's code aligns with state tiny home standards: 6'8" ceiling height in living areas, emergency egress, proper ventilation, electrical systems that meet code. If you meet those specs, you're approved. The advantage here is amenities. You're in Knoxville, which means you've got the University of Tennessee Medical Center, multiple urgent care clinics, grocery stores, co-working spaces like the Tombras Business Incubator, all within a 10-minute drive. Compare that to Lewis County, where the nearest Walmart is your social hub. For remote workers or retirees who want off-grid aesthetics without total isolation, Knoxville's Homemakers program is the sweet spot. The scoring system prioritizes people who can start construction quickly. If you're sitting on the lot for 2 years doing nothing, you're not getting approved. The city wants active residents, not land speculators. They also look for neighborhood compatibility, which is code for don't build something that looks insane next to a row of bungalows. You've got freedom, but it's moderated by urban context. If you want to build a straw bale house, you can, but it needs to fit the visual rhythm of the street. One more thing, Knoxville allows you to combine unbuildable parcels for other uses. If a lot is too small or oddly shaped for a structure, you can buy it and turn it into a permaculture garden or expand an adjacent property. That creates opportunities for urban homesteading, buying multiple cheap parcels, combining them, and building a self-sustaining micro farm in the middle of the city. You're not going to raise cattle, but you can absolutely do intensive vegetable gardening, chickens, maybe even bees, depending on local ordinances. Knoxville also has a robust maker community and access to resources like the Knoxville Botanical Garden and the Community Gardens program, which means you're plugging into existing networks of people doing similar work. You're not pioneering alone. There are workshops, seed swaps, tool libraries. The infrastructure for sustainable urban living already exists, and the Homemakers program is giving you cheap land to participate in it. Waynesboro. Waynesboro sits right next to Lewis County, and it's become the epicenter of Tennessee's intentional community movement. Dunmire Hollow is here, 163 acres where families live in single-family homes, generate their own renewable energy, grow their own food, and govern by consensus. Monthly dues are $56, $56 a month to live in a functioning off-grid community with shared infrastructure and zero HOA drama. Compare that to a traditional suburban HOA, where you're paying $200 a month for someone to tell you you your mailbox is the wrong color. At Dunmire Hollow, you're paying a third of that, and you actually own your energy systems and food production. The dues cover road maintenance and communal infrastructure, but your solar panels, your garden, your water catchment, that's all yours. Forest Ridge is forming near Waynesboro as well. It's a vegetarian community aiming for 100% off-grid solar and 90% food. Self-sufficiency. They're in the early stages, so if you want in, now's the time. The model is similar to the farm, but smaller and more focused on dietary and environmental commitments. They're explicitly screening for people who are serious about plant-based diets and low-impact living. If you eat meat or you're not interested in intensive food production, they'll tell you up front it's not a fit. The Waynesboro area has been the off-grid heartland of Middle Tennessee since the 70s. The regulatory freedom of Lewis County, combined with the social infrastructure of established communities, creates a unique ecosystem. You're not pioneering alone. You've got neighbors who've been doing this for decades, who know which solar installers are reliable, which septic contractors won't rip you off, where to source Amish-built cabin shells for $15,000. Wayne Medical Center is right in Waynesboro, 19 miles from Hoenwald, with a 74% patient recommendation rate. You're not next door to a trauma center, but you're also not an hour from basic medical care. For routine checkups, minor emergencies, and ongoing care for chronic conditions, you've got local access. If you need specialized surgery or serious trauma care, Maury Regional in Columbia is another 20 to 30 minutes, and they've got award-winning orthopedic and joint programs. The cost of living in Waynesboro is absurdly low if you're pulling a remote income or living off savings. Your monthly burn rate can drop to under $1,000. Property taxes, food you don't grow yourself, occasional fuel, and maintenance. That's the economic engine of these communities. You're opting out of consumer debt cycles and rent-seeking landlords in exchange for a higher upfront investment in skills and infrastructure. Here's what that looks like in practice. Say you buy 5 acres near Waynesboro for $20,000. You put up an Amish-built cabin shell for $18,000. Finish the interior yourself for another $10,000. You install a septic system for $6,000. You go with a basic solar setup for $12,000. Total investment, $66,000. Your property taxes under Greenbelt designation are maybe $400 a year. You're growing half your food, your monthly expenses for everything else. Internet, phone, occasional groceries, fuel, run $500. That's $6,400 a year to live. If you've got even a modest remote income or pension, you're essentially financially independent. The margin for error is enormous because your fixed costs are so low. And because Waynesboro has an established off-grid culture, you're not the weird guy building a weird house. You're just another person doing what people have been doing there for 50 years. The social acceptance makes permits, zoning variances, and neighborly cooperation way easier than if you were trying to do this in a suburb. Somewhere, Blaine sits in Granger County, about 20 minutes east of Knoxville, and it's become famous in off-grid circles for cheap, unrestricted land. 75-acre tracts have sold for around $2,000 an acre. That's $150,000 for 75 acres of mountain property with no zoning restrictions, no building codes outside city limits, and agricultural zoning that permits basically anything. You could buy 10 acres for $20,000 and have space for a homestead, workshop, and enough buffer that you'll never see your neighbors unless you want to. The terrain is hilly, which gives you elevation changes for passive solar design and gravity-fed water systems. The soil is limestone rich, which is ideal for tomatoes and a bunch of other crops. Spring water is common, so you're not drilling deep wells or hauling water. Greene County, where Blaine is located, runs land auctions where parcels are advertised as unrestricted, and they mean it. No zoning board dictating what you can or can't do. You want to park an RV and live in it while you build a house? Go ahead. You want to build a yurt, a geodesic dome, a shipping container home? Nobody's stopping you. The lack of building codes is the same regulatory subsidy you get in Lewis County, but Blaine's proximity to Knoxville changes the equation. You're 20 minutes from a major city with hospitals, universities, co-working spaces, international airport. You can live completely off-grid in the woods and still drive into town for a dentist appointment or or a client meeting without it being an all-day expedition. The Blaine model that off-grid forums talk about is this. You combine Tennessee's lack of state income tax, unrestricted agricultural zoning, greenbelt property tax relief, and dirt-cheap land into a package that lets you live off-grid for less than the cost of a mid-tier sedan. People are buying land for $20,000 to $30,000, putting up cabins for $15,000 to $25,000, installing solar for $10,000 to $15,000, and walking away with a fully functional homestead for under $70,000 total. Because you're in the Knoxville metro area, albeit the very rural edge of it, you've got access to labor and materials that are harder to find in truly remote areas. You can hire local contractors who know the terrain and the building techniques that work in East Tennessee. You can buy materials from Knoxville suppliers without paying insane shipping costs. And if you get stuck on a project, you can drive into town and talk to someone at a hardware store who's seen the problem before. The University of Tennessee Medical Center is in Knoxville, which means you're 25 minutes from one of the best hospitals in the state. For retirees, that proximity matters. You're not sacrificing access to quality healthcare to live off-grid. You're just accepting a 20-minute drive instead of a 5-minute one. East Tennessee also has a strong Amish and Mennonite building community. You can order a custom cabin shell, built off-site, delivered and set on your foundation for $15,000 to $25,000, depending on size and specs. These aren't luxury builds, but they're solid, functional, and they meet your needs if you're not trying to impress anyone. The Amish builders in the area have been doing this for generations. They know how to build structures that'll last in East Tennessee weather without requiring code-compliant materials or engineered plans. Columbia. Columbia is the county seat of Maury County, and it's home to Maury Regional Medical Center, which has won awards for orthopedic and joint care. That makes it a healthcare anchor for the entire Middle Tennessee off-grid corridor. If you're living in Lewis County, Waynesboro, Summertown, or anywhere in that region, Columbia is where you're going for serious medical care. But Columbia itself has become an interesting off-grid adjacent town because of its position in THDA's targeted area programs. The city qualifies for development gap subsidies, down payment assistance, and seller credits, which means you can get into homeownership here at price points that wouldn't exist in a free market. And because Columbia is close to the intentional communities and no-code zones, you're getting the benefits of proximity to off-grid culture without living in the woods. Columbia also has land bank parcels available through Maury County, similar to Shelby County's model. Tax delinquent properties get cycled through a competitive bidding process, and if you're willing to rehabilitate a blighted lot or structure, you can acquire land for significantly below market value. The county wants people who will improve neighborhoods, not speculators who'll sit on empty lots. The town has a robust downtown with local businesses, farmers markets, a strong food culture, and access to outdoor recreation. You're 30 minutes from Nashville if you want urban amenities, but you're also 30 minutes from some of the most established off-grid communities in the state. That puts you in a position where you can participate in both worlds. You can have a remote job, live in a code-compliant home in Columbia, and still drive out to the farm or Dunmire Hollow for workshops, community events, or just to buy produce from people you know are growing it sustainably. Maury Regional's presence also makes Columbia attractive for retirees who want to be near quality healthcare but don't want to live in Nashville's expensive housing market. You can buy a house in Columbia for $150,000 to $200,000, which is half of what you'd pay in Nashville, and you're 10 minutes from an award-winning hospital. If you're in your 60s or 70s and you're thinking about off-grid living, that proximity to healthcare stops being a nice to have and starts being a necessity. The other advantage is education. Columbia has access to TN Reconnect and TN Promise, the state programs that provide free community college and technical training. If you're relocating to Tennessee and you want to retrain for a trade, welding, electrical, plumbing, carpentry, you can do that without taking on student debt. That's a huge asset if you're trying to build an off-grid homestead and you need hands-on skills to make it work. Centerville. Centerville is the county seat of Hickman County, and it's home to Ascension St. Thomas Hickman, which serves the area around Hoenwald and the Lewis County off-grid zone. It's 17 miles from Hoenwald, which makes it the closest hospital for anyone living in the unincorporated no-code areas. Centerville itself is small, population around 4,000, but it's got the infrastructure you need if you're living off-grid nearby. Hardware stores, grocery stores, a few local restaurants, a public library. It's not Nashville, but it's also not a place where you're driving an hour for basic supplies. Hickman County has similar regulatory characteristics to Lewis County. Outside city limits, building codes are minimally enforced, and the county doesn't employ a large codes department. That makes Centerville a logistics hub for people building in the area. You're buying materials here, hiring contractors here, accessing services here, even if you're living 10 miles out in the woods. The county also qualifies for THDA programs, which means you can access development gap subsidies and down payment assistance if you're buying in Centerville proper. And because the town is small, property values are low. You can buy a house in town for under $100,000, use it as a base while you build out on rural land, and then either sell it or keep it as a rental once your off-grid place is finished. Centerville is also close to the Duck River, which is one of the most biodiverse rivers in North America. If you're into fishing, kayaking, or just having access to clean water for recreation, that's a major quality of life factor. The area has a strong hunting and outdoor culture, which means you're surrounded by people who know the land, know sustainable practices, and aren't going to look at you sideways for wanting to live differently. The town has a farmer's market that runs spring through fall, and there's a strong local food culture. If you're trying to build food sovereignty, being near people who are already doing small-scale farming, gardening, and food preservation gives you a network to learn from. You're not figuring out how to can tomatoes by watching YouTube videos. You're asking your neighbor who's been doing it for 30 years. Chattanooga. Chattanooga is the outlier on this list because it's not a small town and it's not a no-code zone, but it's become a major destination for remote workers, and the city has built an entire infrastructure around attracting people who work for out-of-state companies and want to live somewhere cheaper and more livable than the coastal cities they're leaving. The pitch is this: Chattanooga has gigabit fiber internet citywide, which was installed by the municipal electric utility. It's faster and cheaper than what you'd get in San Francisco or New York. The city has co-working spaces, a strong startup culture, access to outdoor recreation, rock climbing, hiking, kayaking, mountain biking, all within 20 minutes of downtown. And Tennessee has no state income tax, which means if you're earning a Silicon Valley salary remotely, you're keeping more of it than you would in California. Chattanooga's relocation incentives have included move stipends, down payment assistance, and partnerships with local co-working spaces to provide free memberships for the first year. The details shift depending on funding, but the strategy is consistent. Import high earners will generate sales tax revenue without taking local jobs. For off-grid living, Chattanooga's relevance is this: you can live in the city, work remotely, and use your income to fund a rural off-grid property elsewhere in Tennessee. You're not living off-grid full-time, but you're building equity in a system that lets you transition to it eventually. Or you're using Chattanooga as a base and spending weekends and vacations at a cabin in Bledsoe County or Sequatchie County, both of which have cheap unrestricted land within an hour's drive. Hamilton County, where Chattanooga sits, also allows ADUS up to 800 square feet in single-family zones. That means you can buy a lot in Chattanooga, build a small primary residence, and add an accessory dwelling unit for aging parents, adult kids, or even as a rental to offset your mortgage. It's not pure off-grid living, but it's a pathway to multi-generational housing and lower per-person living costs within a city that has urban amenities. Chattanooga also has Erlanger Hospital, which is a level 1 trauma center and one of the best hospitals in the state. If you're building an off-grid property in the surrounding counties, knowing you're within an hour of serious medical care changes the risk calculation. You're not isolated the way you would be in some of the more remote parts of West or Middle Tennessee. The city's economic development strategy is explicitly targeting remote workers and retirees with disposable income. They want people who will spend money locally, start businesses, and contribute to the tax base without competing for local jobs. If you fit that profile, Chattanooga is rolling out the red carpet, and once you're established there, you've got the financial stability and the proximity to rural land to build out whatever off-grid vision you're chasing. So here's what it adds up to. Tennessee isn't handing out free land the way frontier homesteading programs did, but it's created something arguably more valuable: a regulatory and financial ecosystem ecosystem that makes independent living genuinely affordable. The mechanisms are varied. Some are actual cash, some are tax breaks, some are just the absence of bureaucratic friction, but they all point in the same direction. If you're willing to take on the responsibility of building, maintaining, and managing your own systems, Tennessee will get out of your way and sometimes even subsidize the effort. The Hoenwald model is pure regulatory freedom, no permits, no inspections, full autonomy, full liability. The Memphis model is urban opportunism, buy distressed parcels for nothing, rehabilitate them under modern tiny home codes, live legally in a city with infrastructure. The Summertown model is collective subsidy, pool resources, share costs, trade privacy for social support. The state subsidy model in towns like Lawrenceburg is gap filling, THDA, USDA, conservation easements, all designed to make housing and land accessible in places the market has written off. The healthcare reality is consistent across most of these towns. You're 20 to 30 minutes from quality medical care. That's the trade. You get cheap land, low taxes, regulatory freedom, and tight-knit communities. You give up the 10-minute drive to the emergency room. For some people, that's a deal breaker. For others, it's the entire point. You're opting into a life where your monthly expenses can drop below $1,000, where your home costs less than a used car, where your property taxes are based on agricultural use instead of speculative development value. Tennessee's betting that enough people want that trade-off to justify building the infrastructure to support it. The growth in these communities over the last 5 years suggests they're right. People are leaving expensive cities, cashing out equity, and relocating to places like Waynesboro, Blaine, and Columbia, where the same money buys not just a house, but an entirely different relationship to work, consumption, and independence. The states made it easy. The question is whether you're ready to take them up on it.